did we get to this place where it's still too close to call? One of the candidates is a convicted criminal.
You know, actually, if you think about it, I mean, this election has so many individual sort of aspects to it that are unprecedented all by themselves, from what you mentioned to the fact that, you know, the Republican candidate lost and was not rejected by his party for the next election because he never conceded defeat and was then renominated. That's unusual. We had the other candidate, the President of the United States, essentially melted down in a debate and had to be replaced.
Right.
The current Democratic nominee basically never won a primary vote because she was not involved in any of the primaries, right? Because that was President Biden. And of course, the Republican nominee was almost assassinated on national television. I mean, think of all of this is really an extraordinary year. Yeah.
Let's home in on foreign policy, because that's what affects countries out here in Asia Pacific. I was going to say the Philippines, but also the rest of ASEAN. To be honest, we haven't heard that much from either candidate on the campaign trail. The expectation is Harris will keep to the center-right policies of Biden, but again, it could change. And Trump is, of course, seen as quite transactional. I asked this to Don Gill yesterday. If I were Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, who would I want to win the U.S. election?
Well, so, you know, your mileage may vary, right? So, I mean, I think that Trump is seen as, of course, very erratic, right? So now I was in government during the first Trump term. I was actually serving in the U.S. Embassy in Australia at the time. And he would say things that would sort of befuddle our hosts, right? They would ask me, they say, what did he mean when he said this? And I would say,
sounds like Duterte.
Yeah, well, I said it may mean nothing. Wait 48 hours. It might be a ship that passed in the night. And so we're used to the idea that the things that a president says have this extraordinary weight to them, and that's just not always the case with Donald Trump. I do think, you know, one of the things that Xi Jinping would have to be concerned about is the threat of tariffs, because those have been explicit and they have been repeated, and, you know, the threats about tariffs specifically on China have been much higher than what he's sort of said regarding other countries. So, I mean, I think that particular thing would have to concern Xi Jinping very much. Now, if you ask, you know, sort of more generally, what, you know, so the Republicans, of course, are much more modest in what they're interested in doing in Europe with regards to Ukraine. So Vladimir Putin may sort of prefer that approach to what the Democrats offer. But both parties have been pretty hawkish on China across the board. And I'm not sure that there's a preference of one over the other if you're Xi Jinping with regard to sort of how aggressive they're prepared to be with China.
The other analysts keep saying that there is bipartisan support for continued engagement in the Indo-Pacific.
Yes.
But there is, for me, the lingering question of who would stand up to Xi Jinping. Right?
Yeah, and I mean, this is one of those things you don't know until you know, right? So I would say, you know, again, what we most expect out of a Harris administration would be continuity. But eventually her own personality is going to come to the fore, and it's a little bit of a cipher at this point, right? We're all kind of guessing, and unfortunately our very truncated process with very limited, only a single presidential debate, really didn't touch on the Indo-Pacific at all. And, you know, I mean, I think that that's unfortunate, because it would be good to see her kind of unfold her views on Indo-Pacific affairs for the American people. And that just, there was no time for that to happen. Now, we have lived through a Trump presidency before, so it's not like we haven't been here. And so the question is, how would a second Trump presidency, 4 years removed from the first, be different from the first?
And that's what a lot of people are asking too. A lot of pundits are saying that they don't expect Trump 2.0 to be the same as Trump 2.0, the first version of 1.0.
So famously, in the first Trump administration, he appointed, quote, the generals, right? He had General Mattis and General McMaster and General Kelly, and he had all these generals. And I think he had a certain expectation about how they would sort of approach the job. And I don't know that he was satisfied with what he got. I think he expected that they would perhaps be more, a little, you know, we'll salute sharply and do what you say. And apparently they pushed back a lot more than he expected. In fact, for the podcast that I host, we interviewed General McMaster not very long ago, and it's clear that Donald Trump was expecting less sort of resistance from what he wanted from his national security advisor. And so, you might expect that there would be kind of a desire for him to get people who are more sort of in line with his way of thinking this time. But at the same time, for all of those cabinet officials, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, those kinds of people, those people have to be Senate confirmed. And so, it won't be the circumstance where Donald Trump can just have anyone he wants. He still has to get them through the Senate with a majority vote.
Okay, speaking of Senate, some people are also worried about who's going to take the Senate and who's going to take Congress. And I'm wondering, from the Philippines, and I also asked Don Gill this, what would look better for us? I mean, obviously, it would be better for America. I think if everything was just in one party so that things could go more smoothly.
Well, so that depends on your outlook. So I think it's very unlikely the Democrats take the Senate. It's just, it's not their year for the Senate. So, the way these things tend to run in cycles, the senators who are up for now were up 6 years ago, which was a Democratic year. So there tend to be, in those close states, there tend to be more Democrats up for re-election than the Republicans.
They're in good position for the House, though, to take the House.
It's kind of a coin flip for the House, kind of like the presidency. And funny thing is, oftentimes, the American people are have split, opinions about that. And there is some feeling like having divided government protects us from sort of wide swings one way or another. We almost want our politicians to fight among themselves because then we don't get sort of extreme...
Like a true checks and balance.
Yes, exactly. And it is very annoying for people who are ideologically committed to one or the other, right? Because you can't get all the stuff you want. You get very frustrated. But at the same time, we kind of designed the system to be frustrating.
I also read somewhere that they're saying that people are looking for someone, what Americans should be looking for is someone who can kind of work with the other team. And that is one quality, I think, like you said, we didn't really get to know Harris so much because she just came in to replace Biden. And so who do you think among the two, Trump or Harris, can actually see past the divide?
Well, so one of the interesting things about Donald Trump is that he is not as ideological a figure as you might think. So for example, he was, widely considered to be, blamed or credited, depending on how you look at it, to be the person who pushed through a number of justices who eventually overturned Roe v. Wade, the constitutional right to an abortion law that we had. But now he seems to be sort of on the other side of that, thinking that didn't work out so well for my political party. So maybe so we don't know what he's going to do. So in some ways, Donald Trump, although he's very polarizing, a character, at the same time, he may be more malleable as an ideological figure. So it's
a very kind way of putting it. A character.
Okay, Ray. I mean, election results aren't expected to come out anytime soon because of how close surveys are. But if you could advise Philippine leaders on how to prepare for a Trump or Harris presidency, what recommendations?
So usually the question is, what do we do if it's Trump, right? Because if it's Kamala Harris, everybody expects continuity. And we haven't got any indication that it's going to be different. Now, it will be different in some way. She will bring in her own people. We're not really sure who those are yet because we haven't had time to work that out. But it's assumed to be sort of in the same vein as what we've had. So one of the things that I've really kind of come to with Donald Trump is you have to be able to work within the system. You still want, the embassy is still important, the State Department, the Defense Department, all of those people are still important. But personal contact with the president and his close advisors is especially important when it's Donald Trump, because he is more likely to reject the advice of his departments, of his officials, of his, seasoned, and kind of go his own way. And so having that personal contact, and frankly, it's something that Asian leaders tend to do better than, say, Western leaders. Western leaders tend to be very much enamored with the way that things are supposed to happen, and you work amongst these officials and sort of things work up to a point, and people have certain ways that they go about things. Whereas I think that Asian leaders oftentimes are more practical, and they're like, okay, if I want to get what I need to get out of that guy, this is how I need to approach it.
Right.
And you've seen that work for, for example, we interviewed Malcolm Turnbull not long ago. He was the Prime Minister of Australia during the first Trump administration, and there were tariffs on the table for steel and aluminum. And Turnbull went basically directly to Trump and said, look, you have a trade surplus with Australia. You're benefiting from Australia. You would actually, but he had to do that personally. It wasn't working by going through the apparatus.
Channels.
He had to get there personally. And so, and we saw actually Shinzo Abe showed up.
Just like that. They ditched the tariffs.
Oh yeah, they did not
wow.
have to, right, they did. Now, unfortunately, the Philippines has a trade surplus.
Deficit.
Exactly, yes. So it's the opposite for the Philippines. But
So you're saying Trump 2.0 bodes well for Bongbong Marcos? How would that relationship play out?
I think that personally they would get along well.
Yeah.
I do. I think
I think they used to own the Trump Tower.
building,
They have,
yeah.
they have a lot of,
So I'm
they have
sure.
a lot of commonalities.
And honestly, he's pretty savvy, I think.
Yeah.
And I think he would get it. And he would also get over it, right? So one of the things you get with Donald Trump is he just says things, and some things are shock the senses for some people. But I think that he would sort of look past that and say, okay, again, what is it that we're trying to get done here? Whereas he wouldn't sort of wring his hands about what the language was that just went by or something.
On the economy,
Yeah.
I mean, Americans are not exactly happy, although the U.S. is doing okay on paper.
Yeah.
Do you think this is what drives people to vote? Because apparently this election, apart from it being unprecedented during the campaign, it's also expecting quite a bigger turnout.
Well, we're actually not expecting bigger turnout than last time. So 2020 was record turnout. We're actually not expecting something as high as 2020 this time. We could always be surprised. And one of the things that I think was already mentioned is that we've actually already, half of us have already voted, right? So half the electorate is
73 million.
so something
of
like
last-
75, 79 million have voted already, and that's probably about half of what we expect to vote this time. And so a lot of these late sways back and forth may not even matter for half of the electorate because we can't change our vote anymore. It's already in.
Right.
So.
And then just coming back to the defense side, EDCA. So under President Biden, Marcos gave him another 4 additional military sites, and they haven't been built up. We need a lot of money for that. So do you think the level of engagement under either of these presidents will carry on, see this plan through, including the plan to build a Luzon economic corridor?
So I think that most of that is already sort of set in motion. And so what it would take to change that would be for somebody to reach in and change the direction of it. And I'm not sure I see any evidence that that's coming. So I think the fact that it's already in motion probably bodes well for those things to happen regardless.
And Taiwan, the idea that Taiwan could get invaded in this president's administration is not so far-fetched. And Taiwan is important, of course. It's part of the first island chain and all of that.
Yep.
Trump being transactional, has suggested it should pay for protection. So again, we don't know what Kamala Harris thinks about Taiwan. So
yeah, he has said that for Europe. He said that for South Korea. He said that many, many, many times over. The way that I tend to administration is that he uses that as a negotiating tactic. He's trying to sort of push people to the edge and say, look, this is what pay your share. And so I would expect to hear more of that kind of rhetoric, but as far as actually changing policy, I'm not sure it's coming.
So it's kind of like the gray zone tactics.
Yeah.
in the West-Philippine
Political
Sea,
gray zone,
where
yeah. I'd say-
Political gray zone
Yes,
tactics.
exactly.
See how far it could go. We're going to have to leave that there for tonight. Thank you so much for your time. Geopolitical analyst and maritime security expert, founder of Sea Light.
An all-around good guy.
An all-around good guy, not according to some publications. Ray Powell.
Thanks.